Thanks, Austin. I appreciate your check is in the mail, man. Look for the water here. I just want to say thank you for having me here. My wife, Deidre, is with me. I'm so glad to bring my much better half. As we tend to say Mississippi, I definitely outkicked my coverage and married over my head, as you can all say. So we wanted to bring our two young children, but we're headed northwest after this to go see our Ole Miss Rebels play, and we didn't think that our 9 and about to be 7-year-old would survive a stormy day in Fayetteville, but we certainly will. And that's a great sort of pivot. I begged Skip to let me come out here and talk about SEC football for 45 minutes, but I don't think anybody in here wants to hear about that for right now. But we're certainly very appreciative to be here. But Little Rock, I mean, for y'all who live in Little Rock or from Little Rock, you have so much to be proud of. I have spent, as Austin mentioned, we were very involved with ACES race this year and spent a bunch of time in Little Rock. What a wonderful town Little Rock is. The downtown area, we were very fortunate to stay at the Capitol Hotel. That is the biggest elevator I've ever been in, by the way. I mean, is that for a basketball team, or maybe Nikolai said some, general maybe rode a horse in it or something at some point in time. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly the biggest elevator I've ever seen. But downtown Little Rock is so nice. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, the gateway to the Delta in Yazoo City, and of course my wife Deidre grew up in Oxford, and we live in Jackson now, and we got to get the folks from Jackson to come to Little Rock to see what y'all have done, because you have much to be impressed with. But Austin Harrison, a first name that I will not forget. What a great story he told us about Kevin Spacey and their new budding relationship and friendship, as I'm sure he'll draw just a few more people than I would once you and Skip get him here to talk. But Austin, thank you for the kind words, and glad to have a fellow Rebel who has his red and blue tie, former Mr. Ole Miss, if that means anything in Hall Country. But as I mentioned, I grew up in Yazoo City, Mississippi, small town, gateway to the Delta, about 45 minutes northwest of Jackson, home of Willie Morris. I'm reading his book, North Towards Home, right now. The great Jerry Clower. If you go to a truck stop, you're bound to find a tape of Jerry Clower. Everybody under 50 has no idea who I'm talking about. But he's very entertaining. He's kind of like the Jeff Foxworthy of the 60s, 70s. Did the Grand Ole Opry, just the funniest guy ever. Your kids will love it. But I was still am, the youngest of 5 boys. Grew up in politics, have so many memories of going to the Yazoo County Courthouse with my father. My father is the oldest of 3 boys. Of course, the youngest is Haley. And I just can remember my dad always taking me to the county courthouse on election night to go as a young boy and have those experiences. And he would even let me skip school when I was in high school to go do poll watching at the alleged bad precincts. So we grew up and we understood. He gave us a great understanding of sort of grassroots politics. And of course, we were Republicans. My dad was elected mayor of Yazoo City when he was 27. So that was still 8 years before I was even born at that time. And I don't know if he still is. He was the youngest ever elected mayor in Mississippi. Wanted to run as a Republican. He had come back from Germany in the Army as a Goldwater Republican. And when he went to register, they're like, well, we don't have a form for a Republican, sorry. So he couldn't do that. But as I grew up, we never won any races as Republicans. We lost everything. Republicans hadn't taken over Mississippi in the 80s and the 90s. So we certainly knew what it was like to get beat and to get beat often. I was very fortunate in 2003 to get to work on Haley Barbour's first gubernatorial campaign as his finance director. I had never raised money before, but we know how to somehow ask people for it, and we were very successful. We raised about $14 million in 2003, which broke the record by about 3 or 4-fold in Mississippi. So it was a great experience. And then late 2007, Trent Lott, who was a legendary senator from Mississippi, decided that he was ready to go home, and Haley got to appoint Roger Wicker, who was this congressman from Northeast Arkansas, from Tupelo. He appointed him to fill the rest of Senator Lott's term, Senator Cochran had to turn around and run in 2008 for the rest of that term. He asked me to run his campaign. You think Republican in Mississippi, that's an easy campaign. So difficult. Remember, this was when President Obama was running for the first time. There was a ton of excitement in the African-American community in Mississippi for President Obama. Not many people knew who Roger Wicker was. So it was a great experience. I still have the polling tracking on my wall in my office that showed us down about double digits with 5 or 6 weeks out, and we were able to come back and win by double digits. You mentioned that I had the good fortune of raising money as the State Finance Chairman for Mississippi. We elected for the first time in 2011 the first Republican since Reconstruction. Speaker of the House. That was great. We got to go work for Romney in Boston. We took our 2 kids up there, had a good summer, and really great experience for Governor Romney. And then, of course, the reason that you asked me to come is what we did with Thad Cochran's race in 2014. Just a couple more points about me. I have a lobbying firm, political consulting firm in Mississippi, the Clearwater Group. We have partnerships in Arkansas and other states. We're very proud of. But the group, my other firm that I'm partners is Strategic Partners in Media. We do national campaigns. We were the firm that did Asa Hutchinson's race. We did his television advertisements. We did his strategy. My partner at that firm, Russ Schrieffer, was the main cog in the wheel for all the message that you saw for Asa. I thought Russ did a fantastic job. We also did some other races. We elected Elise Stefanik in upstate New York, the youngest congresswoman ever elected to Congress at age 30. We did Larry Hogan's race in Maryland. Somehow that guy's the governor of the new Republican governor of Maryland. It was a great race. So we had a good, successful record. My partners, Ashley O'Connor and Stuart Stevens and Russ Schrieffer, are experts in this field, and certainly glad to be with them. Mississippi Senate primary of 2014. I have in my notes, and I've got a little timeline here, outline here for me, and I sort of have how to describe it. I don't know. It's certainly the most bizarre race that I've ever been involved with, and I hope to ever be involved with. I hope to never do that again. I did tell Deidre, and she's going to laugh at me, I'm never doing another campaign again. I'm out. I'm through. This is my last one, which was a lie. I did feel like it that way, but now we're sort of looking at presidentials coming on. Let me try this again. But certainly it was so bitter and so personal beyond anything that I've ever seen. And folks who had done other campaigns that more campaigns than even I have done said the same thing. It was the most bitter and personal campaign that they'd ever been involved with. There was really not a traditional script that was followed really by either side during the primary and the runoff. Remember, we had the primary, and we'll get into a lot of this, and then we had the 3-week runoff right after that. When I look at sort of what our strategy was during the primary from the Cochran side, we try to play it safe. We kind of had the let's just don't lose this. We did very little press. Senator Cochran, because he is a U.S. Senator, was in D.C. a lot. Our organization was not the way that it needed to be. And for the McDaniel side, and we will talk a lot about this as we go, he made a crucial, critical error that ended up costing him the election, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. Most of, and I don't know if you said this, Austin, but a lot of the political pundits and political journalists around the country said it was the most negative campaign of the cycle, if not in recent years. And that quite frankly, sucked when you're from Mississippi, to be honest with you. It was bad. It was not fun turning on Morning Joe, or it was not fun turning on talk radio or looking at Politico or whatever your favorite magazine is and seeing all this negativity about our state. Quite frankly, we were becoming Louisiana. We don't want to become Louisiana. We're just trying to get to Arkansas. If we can reach you guys, your level. But it was not. It was not a fun experience. People were just looking at Mississippi in such a negative light. And then here you had Senator Cochran, who has, been such a great servant for Mississippi in the U.S. Senate for so long and in the House, and his legacy was being ripped away by people who didn't really care. So that was really the worst part of the whole thing. It certainly introduced outside spending in Mississippi in ways that we have never seen and we may never see again. We've seen the Republican Governors Association come in and spend money and some outside groups here and there, but never at this level. You know, for the McDaniel side, I think they spent about $8 million in outside money, the Club for Growth, the Senate Conservative Fund, and sort of a myriad of other Tea Party groups and other groups that were supporting him from really late 2013. And then from our side, I think it was about $3 or $4 million spent outside money from the United States Chamber of Commerce. I think they were here speaking to you guys earlier a couple weeks ago, the National Realtors, the Republican Senatorial Committee, and then the Mississippi Conservatives PAC, which was a Mississippi-based PAC that was supporting Senator Cochran. So, you know, really we saw what you guys saw in Arkansas this year, tons of outside spending. Y'all have never seen Arkansas like this. I can't imagine that you have with the general elections for Cotton and for Asa. And we certainly saw that and hope we don't see it like that again. But again, it was just such a bizarre campaign in so many ways. I thought it would be interesting to sort of look at some key lessons that can be learned from this race for a number of different groups, certainly lessons that stick out to me. Let's look at it sort of like key lessons to learn for candidates, whether you are the incumbent or whether you want to be the incumbent. I would say genuineness matters. There's no question about that. When you look at the examples of Thad Cochran and all these things eventually, you know, proved to be fruitful for him because he won as we know how the story ends, he won the runoff and then of course won the general election. But he was very genuine in how he did his job and how he demanded that his staff did their job. And they excelled at taking care of their constituents. They excelled at taking care of everybody's needs. They weren't just concerned with white voters or black voters or young voters or military voters. They didn't just say, well, these are the people that elected us when he first got elected and those are the folks we're going to take care of. They looked at the needs of all Mississippians. And that was very important. He was very genuine in that way. So if you're already an elected official, if you're a two-term congressman, you want to run for statewide, make sure you and your staff are doing these types of things. Don't just be up there just to be in Congress. Do your job. Very, very important to do your job. You know, focus on policy, focus on your constituent services. That certainly helped us in a major way. I think of some of the issues that Thad had worked so hard on in the years. Agriculture, I mean, he's been sort of the father of the Farm Bill for a number of years. The farmers in the Mississippi Delta and sort of throughout the state, even the chicken farmers sort of in the Pine Belt in Mississippi, they would do anything for Thad. They wrote checks for Thad. They organized for Thad. You know, you had counties like Humphreys County and Sharkey County and Tallahatchie County, small counties of the Mississippi Delta that turned out record number of voters in the runoff because they loved Thad. You go to the Mississippi coast, the shipbuilding industry, Ingalls Shipyard, the biggest private employer in Mississippi, 10,000 plus employers down there. I mean, they are heavily reliant on Department of Defense contracts. Thad was always a warrior for these guys. You've got several different big shipbuilders around the country, but he was always there trying to make sure that whatever the next big ship that was going to come out of the Navy or the Marines, that they were going to try to build it in Ingalls. And that ended up playing a huge role because it's in Jackson County, the Boot Hill of Mississippi that borders Alabama, very important county. Senator Cochran went and worked they have these lines when the shifts open at like 4:30 in the morning. You go out there and you meet, they've got 5,000 employees that come through those gates at one time, and Thad Cochran did it twice. At 76 years of age, he was out there at 4:30 in the morning twice. Our opponent said he was going to do it and never got off the bus. That mattered. These things mattered. And then, of course, what Senator Cochran had done for universities. If we won Lafayette County, which is where Ole Miss is, and we won Oktibbeha County, where Starkville is, huge, like 65-35, big time. It's because of what Thad had done for the universities. And then, of course, Katrina. Katrina played a huge issue in this race. Thad Cochran, I mean, if it wasn't for Thad Cochran, Mississippi would not have been able to rebuild the way that it did. Mississippi would not have been able to contrast the way that it did with how poorly Louisiana handled their efforts. Thad was the stallion for Mississippi in Congress, making sure that the Katrina relief bill got directed in the way that it needed to. And of course, we'll talk about this in a second, but our opponent, Chris McDaniel, had some really dumb things to say about Katrina. I don't know if you guys will remember, but he said, I question whether I would have supported the Katrina relief bill. What? I mean, come on, man. What do you, I mean, it was ludicrous, man. But we'll get into that in a little bit. I don't want to get sidetracked. But again, for candidates, so be genuine, do your job, excel at your job. That really matters. And then the other thing which sort of hurt us is you've got to be prepared for the political atmosphere and the political campaign that you've got to run to win. Senator Cochran was not. I don't think it was his fault. Guys, I mean, he hadn't had a big-time race like this in a long time, certainly in a long time. And he wasn't prepared for the bitterness that campaigns have become today, that the social media intangibles that are involved in campaigns, that somebody's got a cell phone in front of you with a video camera at all times. Those were just things that he was not ready to deal with. He got there, but he wasn't out of the gate. And also, he was not and is not, because he's a genuine guy, not someone who was just willing to use rhetoric for his political advantage. It's not him. Thad Cochran wants to talk about national events, national defense, not events. He wants to talk about health care, and he wants to talk about ag policy, because those are things that matter to him. He didn't want to get up here and pound the podium and talk about this about President Obama and this about conservative issues. That's just not who he was. And those hurt us coming out of the gate. It was just a fact. A lot of, you hear people talk about, all these candidates do is they go to their polling and they look and they find the key words and key phrases that matter to people. Not Thad Cochran. He wasn't going to do that. That's not who he was. But again, it ended up helping us because people at the end of the day, after they saw this, really weird, bizarre primary, they go, he's genuine. I trust him. I've known him. This guy I can't get comfortable with. So that really did matter. It took Senator Cochran, we're still talking about lessons that candidates must learn. It took him a long time to make a decision that he wanted to run. Again, I say this all the time about him. He was very genuine. He didn't want to run just to run. He didn't want to run unless it was the right thing for him to do. And it caused him, he didn't make a decision in December. First primary was June the 4th. That's 6 months. So that caused him, what was it, sort of mid-December when he made this decision? It froze everybody else that was thinking about running. Tate Reeves, who's our lieutenant governor, Stacey Pickering, who's our state auditor, Delbert Hoseman, who's our secretary of state, Greg Harper, who's a congressman. These other guys were thinking, if Thad doesn't run, I'm going to run. So these guys were all frozen because they respected Senator Cochran. They loved Senator Cochran. They all ended up helping Senator Cochran for the most part. So it froze those guys. And Senator Cochran took his time. But he took his time for the reasons that he felt were the right thing and everybody respected it. But the turnaround, he had quick turnaround to get that campaign going, and that was very difficult for him. And then a negative was they didn't have enough money. I mean, they had $800,000 in the bank. It just wasn't enough. They should have gone into that race with $3 million in the bank. So if you're a candidate and you're sitting in Congress, and you're sitting in the legislature or wherever you are, you better start raising money. Have a war chest ready to go from day one. That's very, very important. You think $800,000, that's a lot. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to put him sort of in that super strong position to where he can fend off $8 million of outside money that came in. A lot of that outside money came in because he said he didn't have the war chest that Lamar Alexander had in Tennessee, or Lindsey Graham probably had in South Carolina. And he didn't want to, and this is again his genuineness, he didn't want to get, this is my opinion, he didn't want to go raise money if he wasn't sure he was going to run. He's not going to go call Skip and say, Skip, I need you to give me, $1,000. I'm thinking about running. That's just not who he is. He was only going to call you if he had made that decision. So, But if you're a candidate, if you're an elected official, and you know this is something you want to do, get out and start raising money fast. Get your campaign team together really fast, immediately. The longer that they have time to spend with you and learn about you, and you have time to learn about them, it's really helpful and makes the cohesiveness work so much better. So that's about candidates, that's about elected officials and so forth, sort of lessons that they could have learned from this race. Sort of for campaigns, lessons that they can learn, who I love, Steve Spurrier, former Florida coach, South Carolina coach. Follow his principles. Go for the throat. Play to win. Don't play to lose. Throw the long ball. Run the score up. If you try to keep this close, you're going to put yourself in a difficult situation. That's what we did. Try to keep it close. It's like the Ole Miss LSU game. I love Hugh Freeze, but he was trying to win that game 7-3. Go win it 27-3, and Ole Miss lost because LSU scored a touchdown. I could talk SEC football. Let's do that. But seriously, when you try to keep it close, when you think we can do just enough to where we don't make a mistake, and we think we can win 51-49 or 55-45, that costs you. It cost us. There's no question. We got very lucky that we had that second opportunity. Cost Ole Miss against LSU. We tried to win 7-3. We lost 10-7. Anyway, I'll quit talking about Ole Miss football. So make sure that you are running an aggressive campaign. Run through the goal line. Don't look at polling and think, oh, well, our pollster is telling us that if he models it this way with this kind of turnout, we'll win 56-44. We're good, even though the top line says we're at 47. Don't believe that. Run full speed ahead. Other thing for campaigns, we saw digital media hit Mississippi like it has never hit. We would continuously look and see what Chris McDaniel was doing on television. We would look and see what his outside groups were spending on television. We would try to equate that with what his fate, when you look at the poll and you can say, what are his favorables? What are his unfavorables? Where is he on the ballot? You could always look at, on the favorable, unfavorables, what are people that don't have any opinion or who are undecided on? You could look at these numbers and say, this is where he is in the state. This is how well known that he is. And we would always be so shocked on this next question, which is a great polling question. It's sort of the seen, read, or heard. What have you seen, read, or heard about Thad Cochran or about Chris McDaniel? And we were always blown away that seen, read, or heard for McDaniel was always better than what it was for Thad Cochran. We're thinking, how in the heck is that possible? We've been running his campaign's not even up on television. We've run thousands of points of televisions. The pro-Cochran Super PAC has done all. How is that possible? It was digital media. It was digital media. And I'm such a huge believer of this, and I will never have another campaign where we get beaten with digital media. But these outside groups, you could not open up a web browser in the state of Mississippi, whether it was Drudge Report or Fox News or the Clarion Ledger or whatever it is, and not see some salacious 15-second advertisement about Thad Cochran. We got pounded on social media and digital media, excuse me. It made a big difference. It really did. It was very, very important. So if you're a campaign, you've got to learn the lesson that we had to, regrettably learn in the primary. Don't get beat on digital media. Put the resources where they need to. Organization, of course, organization has been key for campaigns forever. It matters. You guys saw it with what Asa and Tom Cotton did, unbelievably organized campaigns all the way down to the grassroots level. We didn't get there in the primary for a number of reasons. We did get there in the runoff, and that was a mistake of ours. Your strategy, believe in what your strategy is, but also be prepared to quickly shift on your strategy. We did. We shifted in a major way from the primary to the runoff, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the primary, Skip, we knew that there was, because of Poland, we knew there was this huge anti-Obama wave that wasn't coming, it had already hit. You look at it, we were just looking at Poland, and anything you say about President Obama, remember this is a Republican primary, it was, people didn't like him, were tired of it, anti-Obama. And we tried to get Senator Cochran theoretically up on a surfboard on that wave, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. McDaniel owned that space. He was much better. This is where rhetoric came into play for him. He was much better with that. But sort of as we moved into the runoff, we knew we had to throw all of our polling away. We did not poll one time in the runoff. We just didn't. And we knew we had to completely change our strategy. So when you have your strategy, stick with it. But if you need to pivot and believe in what you're pivoting to. We pivoted to more of, if Thad Cochran is your senator, the Republicans are very likely to be in control of the United States Senate. Thad Cochran will be appropriations chairman. For a small, poor, rural state, that means a lot. Think about what Thad Cochran has done for you Mississippians, whether it was on Katrina, or whether it was on ag, or whether it was on flood insurance, or whether it was on education. All these things that just pulled like crap in the primary. You could just say, we could call you and say, okay, do you believe that when Chris McDaniel says that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is more important than local infrastructure, military bases, and airports, which do you think is better? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. 80 to 20. We were just amazed. So we said, we can't do that. We can't go that route. And that's why the Obama wave that we tried to get up on, it failed miserably, and we knew that we had to shift in the runoff, and it was risky. It was risky. I mean, we ran a great ad talking about what Senator Cochran had done for education, had done for highways, and how Chris McDaniel said that he thought that federal funding for education was unconstitutional, and that would have cost Mississippi $2 billion because the word education is not in the Constitution. So that was huge, and we were able to sort of play that very well in a contrast piece where this is what Thad has done for Ole Miss State, Jackson State, all these universities, as well as for highway funding, and Chris McDaniel's against highway funding, and Chris McDaniel's against federal funding of education. Game, set, match. That was big, and that was the strategy that we felt like would work. Many thought we were crazy, but obviously it did work. And sort of another big lesson for campaigns, and you see this in presidentials as well. When I was working for Mitt Romney, we saw this with the Obama campaign that was masterful with the money that they had. Move quick and aggressive. Obama did that to Romney in June and July in Ohio, in Virginia, and New Hampshire. They spent tens of millions of dollars killing Mitt Romney on television. Boy, they went after him hard, very successfully. So here you have Romney, who had no money, coming out of a long primary. Didn't have the money. Obama had hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, and they were buying television. They had people on the ground. They were doing digital media, and they were just pouring concrete on Mitt Romney. It was very, very difficult, particularly with women voters in Northern Virginia, New Hampshire, suburbs of Cincinnati. That was very effective. In our race, it was effective for the McDaniel folks because his outside supporters started running money. I think it was Club for Growth, but I'm not 100% sure. They were running television ads in the late fall of 2013, sort of bio ads on Chris McDaniel. That was great. Nobody knew who he was before that. He was just some state senator from Jones County. So I think Matthew McConaughey's doing a movie about Jones County, which is crazy. We'll get to see that. I don't think Chris McDaniel will be in the movie. But it worked very effectively. And then for the Cochran side, we had a Mississippi-based super PAC that actually my brother ran, which was really funny because we couldn't communicate during the race because you're not supposed to coordinate. Oh, and the people had so much fun on the internet. Oh, those Barbour boys, they're coordinating. We didn't. The only thing we could talk about was really our family or Ole Miss sports. There I bring Ole Miss sports up again. But we were in Omaha in the College World Series, so we were able to talk about that. But seriously, the pro-Cochran Super PAC spent a bunch of money hitting McDaniel in January and February and March of 2014, which helped raise his negatives. Didn't raise them enough, but they did a very good job of spending money. So both sides took advantage of that theory that campaigns, I think, should follow. Come out quick, come out aggressive. You'll see presidential campaigns do that in a major way in 2016. And I'm thinking that as I think about the Asa Hutchinson race here, you saw the DGA try to come in and do that with Governor Beebe ads. They had Governor Beebe and Mike Rawson ads. They tried to come out early, right after the primaries were over. It didn't work. Governor Beebe, as popular as he is, could not transfer his popularity over to Mike Rawls. And then you saw the RGA counter that as well. So that's the sort of lessons to learn for campaigns. Okay, lessons to learn for the Tea Party. And this is just me being honest here. And I think this is more sort of at the local level. Look, when the Tea Party started, I don't know who's a Republican or a Democrat in here, and it's really none of my business. But when the Tea Party started in its inception in 2010, I think anybody that is a Republican agreed with a lot of it. I've seen some different type characters on television, but you sort of believed in this, yeah, man, we're spending way too much money in Washington. We don't have balanced budgets. We have all this debt, all this money we owe to China. It was sort of a good thing. We sort of believed in the Tea Party. But sadly, I see it's been taken over, particularly at the national levels, which of course influence down to the local levels, by either political operatives, mostly who are just looking to make a quick dollar. There are some Tea Party national groups that were raising, I guess, millions of dollars. I guess that's fair to say. And they were spending like 85% of their money on overhead. 15% of their money was getting out to candidates. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. And you should not do that. But so you either, with the Tea Party as of today, you either have folks at the national level who just want to go make money, and they weren't focused on the issues that made this so powerful in 2010. The fiscal issues. That's what people cared about in 2010. People still do care about those issues as well. They didn't care about winning general elections. They didn't care about winning general elections. They could have 30 senators in the U.S. Senate, the Republicans, and they'd be fine. I just completely disagree. But I would say the big lesson to learn for Tea Parties, and I'm going to speak to Mississippi only, is for the people that are still involved, who care about this movement. And there are great folks that are involved in the Tea Party. There are a lot of Tea Party folks who voted for Thad Cochran. I have no question about that. But they need to go take back over their Tea Party at the local level, because it's not necessarily a political party per se, but it is these local grassroots organizations. They need to have the right type of folks who believe in their core issues, that are respected within their community, to be able to go back and take over the South Mississippi Tea Party group. I'm making these things up, whatever it is, Central Mississippi Tea Party group. Because they've got some credibility that they have to go gain in order for people to be able to respect them the way they did just 4 short years ago. I think that's a major takeaway for Tea Party in Mississippi. I firmly believe that. They're good folks that they're involved. They believe about conservative issues, but they got to get back to the basics. This is about fiscal issues. Let's stick to those fiscal issues, and then let's sort of take a lot of the drama that was involved and put it on the sidelines. Another sort of lesson to learn: primaries matter. It's no question. I think the Republican Senatorial Committee understood that going into 2014. I think there are a lot of folks in D.C. and sort of outside D.C. in the political class that were worried about our primary. They remembered 2012 and Todd Akin in your neighboring state of Missouri. I'm sure he's a good guy. I don't know him at all, but some of the things he said they hurt Mitt Romney. They hurt candidates all throughout the country. And they were worried that there was that exact same risk with Chris McDaniel. Everybody knew that he'd made these comments on his radio show, and maybe he was just doing it trying to gain attention, but he said a lot of things about women, a lot of racial things, stereotypical type things that he would have been beaten over the head with, and other candidates running from Alaska to West Virginia would have been said, do you agree with what your candidate in Mississippi, who's the nominee for the Republican Party in Mississippi, agrees with? And nobody wanted that. And that was so important. Of course, they would have asked simple things like, hey, what about his position on education? He says it's not in the Constitution, so it's not, it's unconstitutional to have federal funding for education. So, and then he made a lot of comments about black voters voting in the Republican primary in Mississippi in the runoff, which was very frustrating. And we're going to get into that in a minute. And that certainly would have been a big issue. Don't just think that we're going to win the general no matter who our nominee is. Again, I go back to the Republican Senatorial Committee and Rob Collins and Ward Baker and Senator Moran and Senator Portman. They had the right strategy. They knew we have to go get the right candidates. We're not just going to win in November because we have a primary opponent who won. It doesn't, I mean, a nominee. It doesn't matter who it is. They knew they had to have the right candidates to come through, and that was very, very important. Another sort of lesson to learn for all candidates and campaigns: engage all voters from the outset. Okay, it's very important. Candidates and campaigns, you'll be able to quickly determine who doesn't really want to give you the time of day. But don't just think, well, I'm a Republican and I'm not going to go talk to this group or to that group. Or I'm a Democrat and I'm not going to go talk to this group or that group. Don't do that. This was such a big deal for Senator Cochran. Senator Cochran had done so much for the black community in Mississippi, again, because he believed in serving all Mississippians. He just does. And he had a long history of doing that. And there are examples throughout the state. What he's done for the University Hospital complex in the heart of Jackson is huge for Mississippi. What he's done for Jackson State University, and some of you might not know what it is, one of the most well thought of historical black colleges and universities in the country. What he's done for small, little Alcorn State down in southwest Mississippi. What he's done for health care in the poverty-stricken Mississippi Delta. He's done that. He has historically always gotten the highest percentage of black voters than any Republican candidate had. But he knew, and we knew, that he could go have conversations with all Mississippians. It didn't just have to be white males. It didn't. And it didn't just stop on the coast or in Jackson or in the suburbs of Memphis. We could go everywhere. And that was so very important. And sort of also, we knew moving into the runoff that there were a sizable number of Chris McDaniel voters that we just were not going to be able to move. But we knew with sort of the right message, as you've heard me talk about Ingalls and Katrina and education, that those were folks who just didn't come out and vote in the primary itself. Those were voters that we knew that we could move. So if you're a candidate, if you're a campaign, don't just say, hey, stereotype is my candidate gets these type of voters. Forget that. Go after everybody. You might quickly realize that groups 1, 2, 3, and 4 don't want to give you the time of day, but go to them. You never know. Go try. You try to grow your electorate. And this one sort of makes me smile as sort of a lesson learned, is local and state. That's how I have this labeled. Local and state trumps out of state. When you look at the people who were for Thad Cochran, Tate Reeves, who's our lieutenant governor, Haley Barbour, who was our former governor, Greg Harper, who was a very popular congressman from the Metro Jackson area, Roger Wicker, who just got elected to be chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee, our governor, Phil Bryant, is very popular, Stacey Pickering, who is our state auditor from Chris McDaniel's hometown. All of those people, to Mississippi voters, ended up trumping Sarah Palin, who came to Mississippi and campaigned very hard for Chris McDaniel, Rick Santorum, who brought himself from Pennsylvania to Mississippi for whatever reason, and did it on several occasions. Ron Paul, who came to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I don't think he'd ever been in Mississippi before, but we welcomed him. I don't know if he did anything, but he was successful, and these other outside groups. So local and state trumped the out-of-state influences. And that was key, because we always felt very strongly that. And we've got our current governor, our current lieutenant governor, all these people, all these local elected officials versus Sarah Palin, Rick Santorum, these national Tea Party groups. Who's going to win here? You would certainly, and I'll let them have Ron Paul too. We'll give him Ron Paul. You would certainly think that this side was going to beat this side, but we were, it was good to know at the end that it did. when you look at what Chris McDaniel might have done differently as we sort of pivot on through this, he was really good on camera. He really was. He didn't have any money, okay? He didn't raise hardly any money in Mississippi, so he struggled to get up on television. But when he was on television, he was good. He was a great stump speaker, his rhetoric was a little too much sometimes, but he was really good. Sharp-looking guy. His rhetoric played very well to primary voters. We talked about this Obama wave that everybody knew was coming. He's obviously a really smart, successful lawyer. So you got to sort of give him those credits. But I think if they were to go back and do this again, they were way too harsh with their tone. He had his communications director who was from Washington, D.C. or somewhere. He couldn't find Mississippi on a map before he moved there. And this guy, he sort of started this trend of every time he spoke about Thad Cochran from the first time he crossed our state line, he would call Thad Cochran liberal, pro-choice, and pro-immigration, which were ludicrous. We all laughed at it. Everybody on the state, he's not pro-choice, and he's not pro-immigration. Hell, he voted against the Reagan immigration bill in 1986 when I was 11. But it's funny because their harshness emanated from their staff, and then it moved to these outside groups, and finally it moved to McDaniel. McDaniel tried to do this in the beginning, which was the right play. I respect Senator Cochran. He's done a good job for Mississippi, but his time has come and gone. He went from that to, calling him a liberal, following the role that his comms director had. So it just wasn't believable. Mississippi voters knew it was just ludicrous. I think McDaniel, if he could take his comment back that we mentioned a little while ago about Hurricane Katrina relief, everybody knows how bad Mississippi was devastated with Hurricane Katrina. He got blasted on it. He was simply asked by a Politico reporter, would you have supported the Hurricane Katrina relief package? And he didn't say yes. I think he may even said no. I had to go back and read it, but he certainly did not come out and say yes. He talked about all this fraud and waste and abuse, and made some comments about. I'm not even going to get into some of the comments. But I think if he could have taken that back, he would have come out and go, yep, I'm for it, let's move on. Because that really did hurt him. He got hit pretty hard. And he was also against the Farm Bill. So here you are in Mississippi. Ag is number one. It's the number one driver for our economy is agriculture. And he was against the Farm Bill. I mean, it was just crazy. And then he was against the flood insurance bill. People on the coast have the highest flood insurance rates of anybody in the state. We live in Jackson. We have to have flood insurance just because of where we are based on the Pearl River. So he was against these three huge things that we beat him over the head with: Katrina relief, the Farm Bill, and the National Flood Insurance Bill. So I think if he could have gone back, he would change those three things. And then they wanted to make all these allegations about Senator Cochran's personal life. They were not true. They got so fixated, and I say they, I use that term loosely, because it was sort of like Chris McDaniel and then this orbit of supporters that he had that were intertangled and intertwined with how they were related and engaged with his campaign. And then, of course, you had all the national groups that were over here on this side. But the ones that were all floating around Mississippi, they just got fixated. They got crazed about all these rumors about Senator Cochran. They spent so much time on this. They wasted time. If you're playing pool, they tried the double bank shot versus the straight shot. If they just would have hit that on fiscal issues, or they just would have said, he's too moderate, he's a big spender, he's an appropriator, that's what they should have done. But they got fixated. His supporters got excited. They got out of control. They got consumed by it. And it cost them the election because they committed a despicable act. If you will remember, they broke in to the nursing home of Senator Cochran's wife to take these pictures of her. That cost them the race. Skip and I were talking earlier, and I said, I think that really did cost them the race. One of his supporters this young blogger from around Jackson, got arrested. I looked at it before I came in, May the 17th. The election was June the 4th. For 2 weeks, it was wall-to-wall coverage. They probably talked about it on a Little Rock TV station. about that. It was wall-to-wall coverage in Mississippi for 2 weeks going in to the primary. It dominated. You go look at the verbatims and the polling information. People were talking about nursing home and all this stuff. It was insane. That was obviously a pretty bad mistake on their part. Their national groups, they ran a fantastic paid media campaign. Hats off to them with what they did with digital was phenomenal. Their local campaigns sometimes sort of seems out of sorts. This was a big race for some of these folks who had never done a race of that time. I'm going to try to move ahead here. And then I got to bring this guy up. They attached themselves to some really strange people. One was this California blogger named Charles Johnson. I don't want to give him much credit, but he did prove to be a very interesting dude, and you should go Google him and see some of the things that he had to do. I'm gonna speed up here. I sort of look at a couple of examples. We on time? We good? Good. Sort of some of the I think this is fun to look back on. Some of the toughest incidents that we had to overcome, and these are things you all recognize very quickly, for the campaign, was first we had a big fight with Fox News. Remember Eric Cantor lost? That was a huge deal. Oh my God, Thad Cochran's going to lose. Eric Cantor lost. So we had a couple big rallies in Jackson, and the local news asked Senator Cochran, hey, what do you think about Eric Cantor? Well, just whatever his answer was. I mean, he certainly knew Eric Cantor lost. He read the Washington Post that morning and saw Eric Cantor lost. But he got asked about it at 2 different events. He was kind of frustrated with that question. We had set up, and I had been working with John Roberts. A lot of you see him on Fox News. Great guy. I mean, really, a lot of the reporters you deal with, he was first rate. He really was. And he had been trying to get an exclusive interview with Senator Cochran for a long time, and we finally made it happen. He was very good to work with, but he couldn't be here. So we had some really young junior reporter who was going to fill in for him, and we had it set up right after these first 2 events that Cochran got asked about Cantor at some diner right down the road. So Senator Cochran sits down, and the young kid goes, well, Senator Cochran, what about Eric Cantor? And Thad Cochran responded, well, what about him? Bam, national news. Thad Cochran doesn't know anything about Eric Cantor. Who's Eric Cantor? So it was just sort of like, oh, he's oblivious. We've heard these rumors. It was a mistake by Thad. He should have just answered the question, but I think he was a little pissed off, tired of that question, and but it turned into this huge deal. Front page of the Fox News website. Thad Cochran seems like he doesn't know what's going on with Eric Cantor. It just completely blew up out of control. Deidre and I were in the car driving somewhere with our kids. This Fox producer was screaming at me on the phone because I basically, called BS on this whole deal. But thankfully, John Roberts, being the good reporter, was able to come in and help fix it. But it hurt us. We had a whole, 6, 12, 18, 24 hours on the front page of the Fox website. There was this thing that made Thad Cochran didn't look like he knew who Eric Cantor was, which was completely untrue, excuse me. Then there was this comment that Thad Cochran made about doing indecent things to farm animals. You might remember we were in Hattiesburg, we were at Forest General Hospital, speaking to probably 80 or so people, all their employees. Thad Cochran was up at a podium like this, was talking about how his grandmama and granddaddy were from the Pine Belt. That's where this area is, over in Perry County, right next door. And some of his fondest childhood memories were going to their farm, right close to this hospital, and talked about, that he and his cousins or whatever, the boys out there would go do indecent things to farm, whatever. They're going hunting and all this stuff. Everybody in the room laughed because then he was just sort of joking. But I'm sitting about where Austin is, and there are these reporters on the back wall, and I'm like, oh, man. They're not laughing, but they're doing this. And, of course, by the time we got back on the bus, there it is. What's Thad Cochran talking about? Indecent things with farm animals. What's he talking about? Again, he told a joke everybody in the room laughed about, but the press reports it as sort of this straight line. Oh, God, it was so out of control. I think even some stupid third-party group who were for McDaniel came and ran a radio ad. It was like the weirdest thing ever. It's like, animals making noise. It's so weird. I don't know. I had to have cost him votes. And then probably the biggest incident that we had to deal with was when Senator Cochran was asked, Senator Cochran, what do you think about the Tea Party? I don't know much about them. This is, again, Thad Cochran being genuine. He didn't know a lot about them. He hadn't probably been to any Tea Party meetings. He just was being honest. He wasn't going to do the thing most candidates go, oh, I believe in the Tea Party. I like, they're great with what they're doing. We need more. That's not who he is. But that did rile up the Tea Party, I will say, as you can imagine. But what was really interesting is we always knew that we would see a spot with that quote and that footage, and they never ran it. I don't know why they never ran it. But, obviously it was a mistake by Senator Cochran. He shouldn't have said it, but he's just so genuine. That's sort of what he said. And sort of the last thing is sort of one of the big things we had to get over with. We talked about the McDaniel folks, and they always wanted to push these personal stories and even stories about Senator Cochran's residency. The guy's had a farm in Oxford forever. But they were throwing everything they could against the wall to see what would stick. And I will say, my partner, Stuart Stevens, he was invaluable on this front because of the relationships, really long-time working relationships he had with the New York Times and other publications. He was able to work. He was able to work steadfastly with these organizations and say, now look, this is the Oppo research that just got dumped on you. Let's really look at what the facts are. They're saying this, they're saying that. Let's look at the facts. That was a big deal. And it was one particular story that we worked on for a really long time. Then once we presented the facts, they were like, oh, okay, never mind. But if they would have written the story, hey, we might not have made it. It could have sunk us. But so you give those publications a lot of credit for taking the time to hear what, because of their relationship with Stuart, and Jordan Russell, who was our comms director, did a great job on that as well. I'm going to try to wrap it up. I want to just go through sort of a couple of key moments on the campaign. We talked about these outside groups. They believed in Thad Cochran, our outside groups. The Senatorial Committee, the U.S. Chamber, the Mississippi Conservatives PAC, they had always seen him as someone who could walk across the aisle. He was the quiet crusader. He was someone who they felt like they needed to keep in Washington. Having an in-state PAC that was run by trusted, seasoned professionals, that mattered a lot. They spent several $1 million helping us. And you had guys like Sean Parker, he's the guy who was part of Facebook, Napster, who gave a lot of money to that PAC. Mayor Bloomberg, not real popular in the South because of his gun control stuff, but he gave a lot of money because of what he saw Thad Cochran as. Look, everybody in D.C. gave up on Thad Cochran after we lost on June 3rd, but the Chamber of Commerce, the PAC that I just mentioned, the NRSC and the realtors, they didn't, and that mattered. The Brett Favre ad, if anybody remembers the Brett Favre ad, that was fantastic. The U.S. Chamber deserves a ton of credit for that. It cut through the clutter. You go look at ESPN.com, they're talking about a Brett Favre ad. We were able to reach a lot of voters, particularly rural voters. The Pine Belt was Chris McDaniel's. That was his strongest part of the state, where Brett Favre was, played football at Southern Miss, helped us reach a lot of the McDaniel voters, or voters that hadn't voted. It was really, really key. And obviously it cut through the clutter. We go back and look at polling. We were always around 47. Remember, we didn't poll in the runoff, not one time. We were always sort of around 47, could never get over 50. McDaniel was always around 40, never really got higher than that. June 4th, the day after the runoff, biggest day of the campaign for us. I remember we had this all-hands-on-deck meeting. We didn't know what Senator Cochran was going to say coming into that. Again, you have a 76-year-old man who's just busted his ass running the toughest campaign of his life, and we didn't know what he was going to say. It's the next day. He walked in that meeting. He sat down. Everybody said what they said. He goes, all right, I'm not going back to Washington. Spend the next 3 weeks in Mississippi campaigning. He did. That day, he went to 2 Chick-fil-A's in the suburbs of Jackson, which were huge counties for us. He was out there campaigning, less than, 18 hours, 12 hours after he just found out that he lost the primary. Chris McDaniel went into hiding. There were 4 or 5 days where nobody knew where he was. Dad was out there doing 2. Yeah, seriously, exactly. We had the same, expression. What? But keep on hiding. Good. Yeah, that's what we wanted. because I think people were just, they couldn't believe that he did that. But Senator Cochran and Greg Harper, I'll never forget, we're on this bus. We mentioned Greg Harper, who's this congressman from Rankin County, most Republican county in the state. He had a wonderful speech to Senator Cochran before he got off the bus to this first Chick-fil-A that we stopped. It was a great speech, got Senator Cochran excited, fired up. But that was a big day. Thad supporters from around the state, they came alive. They knew that, we all had a near-death experience. They had to get very engaged. So as we had the Obama wave that hit for the runoff, for the primary, we saw this sort of pro-Thad wave hit for June 4th. There were 300,000 people who had voted for Thad in the past who just didn't even vote in the primary election. Those folks got engaged. I'm going to skip, I think, and say that I know you guys might have some questions. So I'm going to just kind of leave my last page. My wife just said, hurry up. So I think that's maybe a good time. So these are lessons to learn for campaigns. And it was a very bizarre campaign, and I enjoyed talking to you about it, and be glad to answer questions about this or anything else.
Okay, good job, first of all. By the way, that was, I'm glad you addressed, my question was going to be about the Brett Favre. So, and was that orchestrated by the U.S. Chamber?
Yeah, they did.
Completely independent of the campaign?
Oh, yeah, like next thing we saw Brett Favre on TV, was like, yes, this is good.
Yeah.
Can you go get Eli?
I'm surprised you didn't, which I thought was good. One question I want to ask you is, was there a concentrated, coordinated effort to get Democrats in the run? I know some Democrats crossed over, but was there a plan to do that?
Now, look, I answered this question at least 50 times from national reporters, and I know how to answer this question because it's the truth, Skip, which is we reached out to voters throughout the state that we knew believed in Thad Cochran's message. That was the case. Black, white, young, old, Republican, Democrat, folks who believed in Thad, who believed in sort of his conservative message or what he was. So we reached out to any voter, all voter. And remember, we don't have party registration in Mississippi.
Right. We don't even in Arkansas, so the crossover thing does work.
Yeah.
It was okay. Good for you. I mean, it worked, and you obviously did right. Any questions right now? Any questions, Boston? Yes.
Sorry, I spoke for an hour. Goodness gracious.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Ann Haley. I'm a first year at the Clinton School. I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about the timeline. As you were moving towards the primary, when did you start to realize that a runoff was a possibility? And when?
About 9 o'clock on election night.
Right. So
Literally.
how did you turn that around in 3 weeks? Like, he got out there to the Chick-fil-A, but how did you make a plan for 3 weeks, or did you just fly by it for?
Didn't sleep. No, that's a great question. I think our pollster mentioned runoff maybe one time, and maybe the last week. We really didn't talk much about it. There was this third candidate in the race. Thank goodness, or we would have lost. And he got half a point or whatever he got. So really, we started thinking that night as we're counting votes, like, uh-oh. And then I remember a guy named Josh Gregory, who was sort of our database guy that night. He was getting all the numbers and caging them. I was sitting right beside him and said, hey, we may be headed to a runoff, which we were hoping for because we looked like we were going to come up just a little bit short. And then we had a meeting that night. We were up all night and sort of figured out what we needed to do. We knew we needed to get more organized. We needed to get more engaged with these folks. We knew we needed to change the strategy. We knew we needed to throw the polling away. That's what we did. Does that make sense?
Got a question, Nathan? This will be our last one.
You had mentioned that you'd reached out to every electorate or all the voters to see who was in your camp. Did you see that demographic, or did you add or subtract groups after the runoff or during the runoff? Did your base change at all?
We knew we had to expand the electorate for the runoff. We knew we had to sort of go to this general election strategy. We went back and said Thad got 766,000 votes in 2008. I guess there was 320 or 330,000 people who voted in the runoff. So we knew we had to expand the electorate, which is crazy because we never thought, you never see you go from a primary to a runoff and turnout grows. That is insane. And we had about 320, 325 for the primary, and I think there was about 380 or 390 for the runoff. It was crazy. We knew that, and I didn't get to this point, but we knew we hadn't hit our ceiling because there were all these Thad voters who just stayed at home. I blame us as a campaign, but we felt like McDaniel had hit his ceiling, which we were wrong about that. We were right about the other thing.
All right, let's thank us. This was really fascinating.